Well, this request comes in as a result of my latest book, The Art of Notan. Well, we just might as well plug it now. If you want a copy, go to Amazon and find it there. Anyway, in reading the book, the person is trying to find light and shadow as it would be indicated by Notan, this photo she took of a portion of the Canadian Rockies. Now, strange things happening here. The way the Notan works is that the dark area of Notan as a design or a pattern interprets or shows us where all the shadow areas are. And the light area of a Notan shows us where all the not in shadow or the areas that are being hit by light rays are. So that's the way the whole thing works. It's a wonderful way of just simplifying light and shadow so that it makes it easier for you to interpret and actually gives you a lot more freedom for interpreting. Well, anyway, because this situation is not standard, in other words, there's light, there's sunlight, obviously, from the sky. There's sunlight, but the clouds are doing strange things. So this person wants to know, is this area right here in shadow or not in shadow? Well, the whole thing of Notan really does work if you interpret it the way that I explained to you in the introduction there. That if the light rays are hitting, then it counts as in light. In other words, that's the value area that we're going to be working in. Well, this is kind of strange right here, isn't it? Because obviously this area is in shadow. In fact, if you're looking at this whole photograph here, the only areas on the mountains themselves, the only areas that we see that are actually being hit by direct light rays are these areas right in here. You can see, you can just tell by the value, but it's important to try to locate where the sun is. Now, when you're painting in plein air or taking a photograph in plein air, you know where the sun is, you can see it. But when we're looking at a photograph, sometimes we can't really be sure where the sunlight is, where the sun rays coming from. But it appears that what's happening here is the sun rays. If you look at this part right here and this part right here, the sun rays are coming from somewhere right over here, but there are clouds causing shadows. So that strange thing can happen. We see it often in the mountains. That sort of thing can happen where the clouds will be creating a cast shadow over an area. And then, of course, there'll be other cast shadows or form shadows in areas that are turned away from the light rays. So what would we do in the Notan right here? Well, I'm going to show you and show you how we can think about that. So first of all, if you're unfamiliar with how Notan is done, we're only looking for two values. One value is for the shadow areas and the other value is for the light areas. And it's only a pattern that we discover that we can then lay first on our canvas, and then we create our painting based on that. We know that the values that we're seeing in our painting, or the painting we're going to make from the subject, those values that are indicated in this pattern as in shadow are going to be between, well, you can take the value scale, and theoretically, these are the values that appear in shadow, and these are the values that will appear in areas not in shadow. Now, these values are sort of transition values that can be interpreted in either direction as being in each. But right here, it's pretty strong that these values are going to be the ones that we're going to find in areas not in shadow. and these in shadow. Well, once you get used to working that, you'll feel like, how did you ever work without it? So anyway, the way we do it, we can do what I call a direct Notan, where we use a single value and paint directly onto the canvas that single value that's in shadow. Or we can do a lift out Notan, which is what I want to do now. And I do have another quick tip done way early, several years ago, where I show the lift out process. We're going to show you again because also I want to talk about how we think about this. Now, we want our lights and our shadow areas balanced. So let's just look at just this portion right here. What would we do? Well, for the lift out Notan, or both lift out and direct, we want to use a very thin wash. So I've got solvent in my brush, and I'm using ultramarine blue. It's important that we use a paint that doesn't stain so that we can easily lift it out. So I like the ultramarine blue because it does it doesn't influence, it doesn't get mixed in with other colors. And so, I like it's more appealing to my eye than using, one of the earth colors like burnt umber. Ultramarine blue is transparent, so it doesn't leave any residue behind. And the earth colors, such as burnt umber, is one that I used to use a long time ago for Notan or burnt sienna. Sometimes those earth colors will leave a little residue behind, and that could muddy up the colors. So, and I like the cool, like going with a cool. Well, you can use whatever you want to. All right, I'm going to add more solvent. I've got solvent in the brush, and I want here, and you see it's going to run down the palette. So I have a palette tilted here so that you can see. It's going to run down the palette. Now, what I want there is I want about a middle value, or it's something no darker than middle value, and that's something else that when I first started working with Notan, I was working with it very dark, and the dark, when you get the Notan too dark, it tends to interfere with development of the painting. It needs to be kind of middle value so that it will not influence what you're doing in the painting. I think maybe that might be about right. Let's check it out and see. So I think I'll check it out right here. Just test it. Yeah, that may be a little bit on the dark side, but we'll go with that. Now, so what we'll do here is we'll create a wash throughout over the entire, we'll call this our canvas. This little square block I've got here, we'll call that our canvas. And so we'll just create a wash over the whole canvas area that is one value, only one value, whatever value, middle value. If you get that too light, it's going to be difficult to see when you start to work with it. And so that's why I think, in my experience, the middle value. Now, of course, it's going to vary. You're going to get some value variation, but that's not what you're going for. You don't have to be picky. If we get too picky, we get stiff, and we don't want to do that. So I'll just get this covered now. Now, the next part is the lift out part. And we want to start that lift out. It doesn't matter so much. Kind of even that out a little bit, make it a little bit flatter, so we don't get so much variation in value. But the lift out, it's easier to lift out with a stiff brush. Now I'm using a rosemary. What is my rosemary? 270 something. I forget every time. 274. My rosemary 274, which is my kind of workhorse. You can use the wash goes on more smoothly with the softer brush. But for lift out, a stiffer brush. Now I like for the lift out, I like these synthetic brushes, and I like using the flat tip mostly of a synthetic brush because it is sharp and it cuts into where I want to lift out the light, and it absorbs, it pulls in the paint so that it kind of sucks it up like a sponge. All right, so here's where I'm going to start. Now, First of all, let's examine what are we seeing here in the way of value. When you have an area like that where there is snow or water or anything that's reflective, it acts like a mirror. And the light now, it depending if it's water, clear water, you're going to get the strongest reflection of whatever it is aimed towards, you might say. But if it's ice, the crystals of the ice reflect that water or reflect that light and cause it to appear lighter within a shadow area. And so we don't get too picky in the Notan process. What we want is to set up the visual perception of the entire piece. And so this then, we would treat it as an area in light. Well, I want you to notice here, when you're doing a painting of something like this, where a lighter area is in shadow, but such as water and ice, please notice that it's not as white as this, the part that's in light. So if you can visually compare and say that this area of light is darker in value than this, you can see this is very almost white. Got some areas that probably, if we were there looking at it, we would see more value variations. But you see this part is darker. And I would say it's about maybe 1 to 2 values darker, depending this part right here, than this is. And so to set up a Notan for that, let me get a paper towel. I'll need a paper towel, and I'm going to put a little bit of solvent in the brush. If this is still wet, it's going to lift it right out. So I would start about right here. If this were the part I chose to paint, I would start about right here. I'm looking at the proportion of it, and I would begin lift out. And I just hold the brush at an angle and pull it kind of in a crisscross motion and begin to lift out what I see there as lighter in that shadow area. And so just, you see I'm going right down the hill there. It's a little bit wider there. All right, so when we're in these little parts right here, when we begin to paint, we're going to pretty much cover that up. So you don't have to be that specific. We want to be general. So I like to squint when I'm lifting out, and you can't see the squint, but I am squinting, and because it helps you to see that light. So we'll just lift that part out right there, and I'll come right on over here like this. Now you see the brush, because this is still damp, the brush has just a little bit of solvent. Of course, I'm using Gamsol for the solvent, but the brush has just a little bit. So you see, I dipped the brush and washed out the color that it lifted up, and then got a little bit more of that in the brush. That helps. But if you have too much solvent when it's wet here, you may get some drips. It's just a technical issue. It's not anything to get really upset about. You see how that joins right there, and it comes on down. And then we've got this, all this right in here. Now, let's go ahead and follow that. And you see all I'm doing there now is I'm lifting out that area that, even though it's in shadow, is reflecting light. And so this becomes a part of the light pattern. It sounds contradictory, and in some sense it is contradictory. All right, so we have that little area right there going through this mountain in front, and so I'm just going to leave that right there. Let's see, I can't. Yes, there's a little ridge going through. We see some of that coming out there. I would say wait and see how the painting is going to work. Same thing right here. This is obviously in shadow. Still, if you squint, you see it's in that value area. And even though it's light, it's not in a position in relation to the sun that it's reflecting light in a way this is. So be sensible when you're observing these things, and try not to be dogmatic, but be sensible, because you want your painting to make sense. So if all this is in deep shadow over here, even though these areas are lighter, you can see that the value of those areas fall on this side of the value. You can see right here. Fall this area, I call that shallow shadow, or the feeling of shallow shadow. And we see the same thing here. You see the value falls on this side of that value scale. And you see it varies in value. Those little parts of ground snow or snow on trees, I don't know what it is, all that right there. And here too, you see this is obviously in shadow. So what we were concerned with is this area here that is in the shallow is there's some light apparently filtering through, and there's enough light there. It's reflecting on those crystals, and those crystals are reflecting light back at us. So yes, we would count that as light. All right, so we continue, and then the similar thing right here. So it's not just this area. This area is lighter, but we have a similar thing going on here. So all this then becomes a part of that light pattern. Now, something else I want you to observe here in this lift out method, and that is how long that that solvent wash, how long it stays damp enough to make that lift out process easier. Okay, let's dampen it just a little bit more. And let's see as we're going down like here. So I think you get the idea now. So we come over on this side. That's that one and if in proportion. Okay, that's something else. Now if we were doing the whole thing, yeah, that needs to come over just a little bit like that. And that needs to go, this part right up here comes out. So that probably would go up just a little bit more, right, sort of like that. And maybe I could scoot this up a little bit more. This then will become a pattern. If you were doing the painting of the entire thing, this becomes a pattern that will become part of the light pattern. So if you get my book, you will see lots and lots of examples in there of the way light and shadow works and the way we can interpret light and shadow. And so the only thing, okay, that's enough of that. Then you can get the idea of how you would handle that area right there. When you start to paint, pay attention to the degrees of value between this area and this area. And you do that by comparing. Now, comparing values in shadow and areas not in shadow. Comparing those values are going to help you to interpret. So dark is never just dark. We have at least 5 visible degrees of values within a shadow area that we call dark. And so we have the same thing, at least 5 visible value areas in areas that we would call light. So that we have lots of light coming in here, and this is obviously the very lightest. And you can squint, this is just a little bit darker right here. And then we have the areas in the cloud areas there that would fall more into shadow. Seen like this, if you were out in plain air doing that, you could see it a lot more specific. We lose a lot of interpretation when we're working from photographs. But if you get the general idea of how those lights and shadows work, I think you'll find that interpreting something like that can be a lot of fun. Be sure to view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianeMize.com where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.